is going to be much more than just a building. This will be one of the world's great treasure houses, a showcase for human history and endeavor. This will be the Canadian Museum of Civilization.
If it's no Scottish, it's crap! Help yourself to a piece of haggis.
Well, if it's no Scottish, it's crap, then maybe that's what we should be calling the Canadian Museum of Civilization. I was tipped off to this idea by our next guest, Gavin McInnes, who told me that you can go through the Canadian Museum of Civilization and not find anything about the Scots' impact on Canada. Gavin joins us from New York, but he originally hails from Canada, Ontario. Gavin, nice shirt, by the way, and thanks for the tip on this. How'd you come about this?
Well, my family is living in Nepean, and they're all from Glasgow. We came here in the early 70s, and my parents are obsessed with this museum and its whitewashing of history, or its brownwashing of history, for that matter.
I took a tour of it this morning, and I was absolutely shocked that you would think, as you go through this Hall of Canada, and it's designed to tell you the history of the country, you would think that Canada was settled by a bunch of French Canadians, or a bunch of French immigrants, and then the Métis came along, and there's a smattering of Ukrainians and some Chinese people, and one black schoolhouse in Alberta. But other than that, not much. Somewhere along the way, these other people showed up, but they never tell you how the English and the Scots got into Canada.
Canada is a Scotland. It's the same culture. That whole hoser thing of saying, hey, guy, what happened to your face there when they meet a burn victim? That's Scottish booze culture. And the whole history of it, from you go to the airport, Canadian airports, everyone in the bar is drinking a pint. You don't have that in American airports.
No, you don't. You don't. In fact, there's no bar right next to the gate, which you have in Canada.
In Glasgow, they'll have their glasses at their chairs by the gate. They're not even at the bar anymore. And you look at all the chip fans in Ontario. The whole accent, A, is Scottish. And that's just what I'm talking about. I'm just talking about the way people talk now. If you go back into history, you'll see nothing but mix. Look at the money. It's all mix.
The reason that I have you on today, by the way, today is the history of the Battle of Culloden. And that's where Bonnie Prince Charlie is... Billy Connolly refers to him, I'll get in trouble for saying this, but an Italian poofter that lives on the outside of shortbread tins. Well, he was trying to lead the Scots to independence. He got defeated by the English, and after that, boom, the Scots start immigrating to Canada en masse, and not just to a little place called Nova Scotia, which, let me translate the Latin there, New Scotland. I mean, they're everywhere. There's the picture of the, I believe that's the picture that goes for the taking of the Plains of Abraham. And the Scots fought that battle and took it, which, by the way, that is completely absent. There is no mention of the conquest that I could find of Britain taking Quebec from France. Not in the Canadian Museum of Civilization.
I actually spoke to the director there in 2009, and I explained that we started the Hudson Bay Company, and we started Medicare, and we weren't just, the Irish were nabbies, they were just workers. We were inexorably linked to the French conquest. We bred with the Métis because we didn't have a class system. We were the only ones that could handle the cold, so we spread across the entire country as leaders, as architects, as designers of the whole country. We shaped the country, and he said, yes, that's true, but we can't be too arrogant about that, and we have to be inclusive. We have to be modest. What?
See, now there is a touch of that. That is a bit of Scottish culture of saying, oh, well, we can't, you can't let your head get too big there, son. I mean, come on. Who do you think you are? Sit down. But they're also very brash.
Well, that's the irony, I guess, of the Scots. They're so used to being underdogs that it becomes a sort of submissive behavior. But at the same time, there's a paradox because they have this sort of drunken hubris where they just come screaming into a room and go, see you, Jimmy! Haggis too good for yous, by the way! And that's how I feel about the museum. They need their asses kicked.
See, now you're just describing my family. See, there's a difference between Glasgow and the rest of Scotland. In Glasgow, where my parents come from, where your parents come from, it's a very in-your-face place. So I thought that all of Canada was like this because growing up in Hamilton, Ontario, it's an Italian city with fish and chip shops everywhere with fish suppers for $4.99. I thought that was everywhere, and then I came up here. Honestly, it is unbelievable. I want to show some of the pictures just so that people don't think we're exaggerating here from the Museum of Civilization. Chinese laundry is actually on display. So the Scots, no. Chinese laundry on the prairies, for sure. And this, not that this isn't part of Canada's history as well, or the Ukrainian church that they picked up off the prairies. This is all part of Canada's story as well. But it's part of it. You go through this Hall of Canada. This is an inn at Louisbourg, recreated. You go through and you would think that Canada was still a French country. Partly due to the fact that because this museum, which is about to become the Museum of History, the federal government decided that they would follow Quebec's language laws. French is first on everything.
But one thing about the French, too, that is inexorably linked to Scottish history. That Scots ran Quebec. That was the government of Quebec before it was completely Francophiled, was run by Scots. And they were called, the Scots and the French were the old alliance because they both hated the English so much. So even a huge part of French history is Scottish.
I actually claim poutine as being Scottish because who else would think, okay, deep fried potatoes, not enough. Let's add more to it. Let's add gravy and cheese. I mean, and I used to live in Montreal.
It's hangover food. It's for whiskey.
Absolutely. I used to live in Montreal, and you go through, and there are chip places everywhere. Maire Drapeau outlawed chip wagons, so you don't get them. So you get these patateries all over the place, and the food.
Yeah, that's where they got their potato culture. Look at McGill University.
Okay, so you mentioned the Hudson's Bay Company, McGill University. James McGill donated the land for that. He started. They decided the Hudson's Bay was too English, so James McGill and a bunch of other Scottish merchants in Montreal said, "We can get some of this business. Let's start the Northwest Company."
Right. The Scots were the only ones who not only could handle the weather, but could handle the Indians. They would literally make love to them. They would breed with them. So when the English came, oh Lord, the Indians are like, hey, are you talking about my wife there, pal? That's my family, by the way. They were the largest landowners in the world back then.
By the way, 4.7 million Canadians claim Scottish heritage. Here's just a list of some of them. In addition to James McGill, we've got our first Prime Minister, Sir John A. Macdonald, Scottish, from Glasgow. Alexander Mackenzie from outside Dundee, Sir Alexander Graham Bell, inventor of the telephone, Sanford Fleming, inventor of time zones, and who designed the entire intercontinental railway system here in Canada.
Oh, is that all?
I mean, well, that's all. I mean, don't get too big for your britches, son. Who do you think you are?
I think if you go back to people with Scottish descent, too, you'll find that the founding fathers of Canada were about 80%. 80% of them were linked to Scotland somehow.
Tell me, you've got a list of some of the towns in Canada with Scottish names, and since we're talking about how the museum overlooks it, give us some while we've still got a moment left.
Well, the list goes on forever. There's not just Nova Scotia, right? Even in PEI, there's New Glasgow. There's New Scotland and New Brunswick. Almost every province has an Aberdeen. There's the Clyde. There's bloody Glasgow, Ontario. There's Scottstown, Quebec.
We're out of time.
How many places have a Loch Lomond? There's Aberdeen, Saskatchewan. There's Aberdeen,
we'll have to cut you there, Gavin.
Angus,
okay. I think he's going to be talking for about the next 10 minutes.
Bloody Clyde, there's Bannockburn, there's Baxter, there's Belvedere, there's Brucedale, Corners. This is just Ontario I'm doing now. There's Colgan, there's Craigleith, there's Craigmont, bloody Crombie. Just the letter C in Ontario.